Hi, I'm Manan Puri and the co-founder of Strategy for GMAT. Today in Musings, the B School Alumni Journey, I have with me Aditya Mallya, who's a fellow alum from the class of 2013 and has a pretty interesting journey prior to ISB and to get to what he's doing here. We'll talk a lot more about that. So for now, I will hand it over to you, Aditya, to talk about your introduction.
Yeah, hi Manan, nice to be here. I think I'll just quickly share a little bit about myself. So I'm Aditya Mallya. I work right now as a city director of Mumbai in Teach for India, which is a non-profit that many of you may have heard about. I've been actually working at Teach for India for the last 4 years, since 2016. Just shifted to a new role within Teach for India like 3 months ago, actually. Before that, within Teach for India, I was working as the director of strategy and learning, which is a team that basically is in charge of strategic planning, monitoring and evaluation, research, things like that within Teach for India. Before 2016, I actually was in the for-profit sector. So I worked in Deloitte Consulting for 3 years, right after my MBA at ISB in 2013. And before ISB, I spent 2 years working with the ITC's personal care products division in Haridwar. So that's kind of like my journey so far. Happy to kind of talk about any more of that in detail as you might like.
Sure, sure. So let's get to your pre-MBA life. So why did you decide to go for an MBA at that juncture of your career?
Yeah. So I think that was kind of always my long-term plan. So I joined right after. I mean, I'm a classic kind of engineering MBA guy. So I did my chemical engineering from NIT Jalandhar. Following that, I worked at. I got a job in ITC, and I was placed in the personal care products factory in Haridwar. And within, like, my idea was to kind of like spend 2 to 3 years over there and go on and do an MBA, because I didn't kind of want to restrict myself into sort of one field, right? I didn't want to spend like 10, 15 years in manufacturing or in supply chain or operations or whatever. I wanted to develop some sort of broader understanding of business and, gain a more holistic. I mean, it's a very overused word in like MBA applications and an MBA world, but yeah, I did actually want to gain a more holistic worldview. I think within 2 years, I actually got a fairly intense and diverse set of experiences within ITC, where I worked as someone who's in charge of systems and processes in the soap factory, and then also worked directly in the manufacturing production line as a shift manager for a few months. So I felt like, in those very short 2 years, I actually got a good compressed experience that would give me a strong base to build upon. So I decided to just take the plunge at that point, and that's why I decided to do an MBA at that point.
Okay. And I'm sure, like a few other engineers that you talk about, you would have taken CAT also and then went for GMAT.
Yeah. So actually, mine was a slightly strange scenario. My primary plan was to kind of apply to ISB itself, and
Okay.
I also applied to a few other universities in Singapore and like a couple in the US. And CAT is only something I almost thought of as like a backup. So my primary kind of intention was to do GMAT, and then a few months into like studying for GMAT, and I said I like better not to put all my eggs in one basket. So I also started studying for CAT a little bit, and I answered CAT as well. So that's kind of how it turned out. Actually, did get a decently good score in CAT. Got a call from a few IIMs, but by that time my ISP result had already come out, so I just decided to go with that and never ended up appearing for any of the IIM interviews.
Okay. Yeah, that was unconventional. So, okay. And coming to ISB and other B schools, so how did you prepare your applications and for the interview? What was the journey like?
Yeah. So I think I spoke to a few people, right? So I'm actually from Goa, and within Goa, I met someone who, not a career counselor as such, but somebody who had experience mentoring people who had gone through various entrance exams and various applications. So I think I just spoke to him, and he gave me some good insights. And I think the valuable thing was that he connected me to a couple of ISB alumni actually, who also had come from Goa and had not really the same background and journey as me, but it was helpful to just have someone from the same background. And I think speaking to those alumni really helped me, because it gave me an understanding of what the school is all about, what they might look for in an application, what are the kind of experiences they value, what do they look for in people, and what is the environment of the B school like. That was really helpful in helping me like mold my application And I think that's the main thing that helped. I also like through those people, then they connected me to other people and so on. But primarily, I think it was those 2 or 3 detailed, insightful conversations that I had with them that I think were the main source of preparation. Other than that, of course, I looked up stuff online that was available in terms of like general interview practices and experiences that other people had. So yeah, that's basically the preparation that I did.
Okay, and I'm sure these folks would have reviewed your essays and practiced interviews, etc. as well. And there is a huge ITC community at ISB also, so
Yeah,
that would have helped as well, right? Uh,
yeah. I think the ITC community is actually something I discovered after joining. And I was like pleasantly surprised to see. I think there were like 7 or 8 people, I think, even in our batch from ITC. But so the ITC community was not as much a factor. But yeah, I think I agree with what you said earlier, which is the essay reviews, the interview practices, even just general conversations that that help you understand all of the things I mentioned earlier about the background, what they look for, what interviews are like actually. Like those things really help a lot. It's really valuable because also I think alumni are involved in the interview process itself, right, for ISP. So especially speaking to alumni before you go into an ISP interview is very helpful, I would say.
okay. And so your ISB journey, how has that impacted your post MBA journey? As you said, right, a Deloitte consultant and now in the development sector.
Yeah.
So how has the time you spent at ISB impacted your decisions and the way you are kind of performing right now?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm not exaggerating. Like, I honestly feel like the time that I spend at ISP, the time actually we spend at ISP, I do feel like it is the most defining year of my life, and I do think it's like one of my most treasured experiences, if not my most treasured experiences. So I would say it's not just impacted my career, but also my life. I think it really just built a lot of like confidence in me. It just opened my mind up completely to like a lot of new possibilities. It I think just opened a completely new way of thinking for me. I think that's the biggest thing that ISB does for me. Like I think it's less about like what are the specific things you learn there and the courses you learn there and how you apply that in other roles. Because I think you could study like a set of courses and then end up in a career that's completely different, which is what actually I have done right now. But I would say that experience is still something that stays with you because the value of the experience, the biggest value of the experience to me comes from just that environment, right? And I think you've experienced it, and it's very hard to describe if you haven't been there. But basically, like it is, the incredible community of peers, the people that 500, 600 people on the campus, or 150, 200 people, depending on which campus you're on, that have come from like very diverse backgrounds, and like you meet like at least I think 100, 200 of them directly. You'll work with them in like study groups and classes and projects and things like that. And then I think that just gives you so many different perspectives to approach problems. The incredible faculty, the professors, the way that each course is really structured, and the density of information, knowledge, perspectives that you get there, and this is a lot of fun also. And I think I think just that experience, I think, is the thing that molds you into somebody who is able to, I think, approach anything later on. Like I think in any field, with a lot of like confidence and structure. Because I think what the experience did for me is just opened my mind up again. I'm saying to a new way of thinking, right? And I think it's just I was very narrowly focused into like the experiences that I had had until that point, and the jobs that I had until that point. So when you spend like this one intense year like studying about like so many different things, and like going through so many different case studies and having all of these projects and meeting all of these different people, and just having a mind stimulated by all of these amazing professors and other peers as well, I think that just gives you a lot of tools in your toolbox to approach subsequent careers later on. So that's kind of the main benefit that it's had for me, and just in terms of my mental model and way of thinking. But for others, I think it could have also very direct benefits in like if you are very sure about what you want to do post ISB, and you can really tailor your ISB experience and study the courses, especially in the elective terms. That will really like give you a boost and give you a deeper understanding in those sectors, like if it's corporate finance or anything or like of that sort, for example. But yeah, I think for me, like I was always like more of a generalist, and even before the MBA, I kept my options open post MBA. And even post MBA, I went into consulting, which is again like a very sort of generalist field. So for somebody like that, I think I just emphasize that the experience is still like really, really valuable, even if it's not something really specific that you take away from a particular set of like knowledge. Just I think the overall experience just molds you a lot.
Yeah, that's I can totally relate to that. It at least enables you to take any plunge that you want, and always there is a safety net or a fallback option that the brand also
Yeah,
gives you.
totally
So
agree.
yeah. Yeah. So although it's kind of different for you, but do you think an MBA is necessary for a role like yours in the development sector now? A lot of people who either are willing or
Yeah,
wanting to go into the development sector, or are currently there and then want to pursue an MBA. So is an MBA necessary for something that you're doing
yeah.
right now?
So I think like I would say yes and no, and I'll explain what I mean by that. I'd say no in the technical sense that like an MBA is not a necessary qualification for the role that I am in right now, right? So, and even when I actually joined Teach for India in a different role, as I mentioned, like 3-4 years ago. Even for that role, it's like a master's degree is kind of preferred, but it's not like a necessary component, and MBA is also not a necessary component, right? So in this particular role, I would say it's not a technical requirement. And you'll find similar other roles in the nonprofit world where it's not technically needed for you to have an MBA to like secure those roles. But I would say like yes, because like I feel like there's no way that I would have been able to do this role as well if I had not gone through that experience and done all of the things that I just described in my previous response. If I had not had that kind of exposure, I don't think I would have been as effective in this role. Also, like I think what came between ISP and this role, right, which is my consulting experience of 3 years. I think that especially is also has what has shaped me a lot as a professional and shaped a lot of my skill set. And that's I think is something that is difficult to also have without an MBA, because I think I'm only like being effective in this role because of my extensive consulting experience, and that experience only came in because I had that MBA. So in that sense, I would say yes. And also like what you said about the brand comes into play, I feel, right? Because I would say like doing a role in a non-profit is definitely like a bit of a risk, honestly, right? Like because especially from a financial standpoint, there was a huge drop off uh, in salary basically, right? So when I made the jump from consulting to here, so that is something that you have to be comfortable with personally. I'm lucky because I had like a good enough personal situation without a loan and things like that where I could take a risk like that. And I think if you are someone who's not entirely sure that you want to make a full-time career in nonprofit management, and it's something that you just want to explore briefly, in that case it's always helpful to have something like a strong brand, like you said, Manan, about like something like an ISP degree. Because if even now, like after spending 4 or 5 years in the sector, I know that if I ever want to go back to the for-profit sector or return to consulting or anything like that, this brand will definitely help me and give me that credibility. So I would say that's definitely one benefit of it. Yeah, I'll just pause there.
Thanks. So, any final tips for B school aspirants who have development sector as their post MBA goal as they prepare for their applications and interviews, given that you've gone through the
Yeah,
journey?
yeah, definitely. I would say like if your aspiration is to be in the development sector post MBA, I would just think a little bit about what are the kind of roles that you want to be in, and also think very carefully about what is the trajectory that you want, right? Because do you really want to be, if you're 100% sure that you're a nonprofit, you want to be in the nonprofit sector for the rest of your life post MBA, then that's great. But if you're not sure about that, then I would think about like is it the best decision to go straight into the nonprofit sector, or is it good to spend a little bit of time in the for-profit sector, right? And I would say if you're not sure, like my recommendation would be to do the latter. I think that's what I also did, and I think I really benefit from that because of multiple things. So one is that if you spend a few years in the for-profit sector, you obviously get the financial cushion. If you've saved up some money, and like you then have give yourself a couple of years of buffer to try something new and try something different. Additionally, I would say like the experience, especially if you're someone who's not had a lot of work experience before, I would definitely recommend like spending some time just experiencing the for-profit environment, right? And working and being successful in a for-profit environment, because I would say it's totally different. It's a totally different kind of culture and a totally different kind of environment in the two sectors, right? It's much harder, I would say, to go from non-profit to for-profit. So if you're somebody who's not had any for-profit sector, commercial sector background, and you're just planning to do an MBA and then going to either stay in the non-profit sector or move in there without a lot of experience in the for-profit sector, if at some point then you want to shift to the for-profit sector, I think then it'll be a very difficult transition, just because the cultures are very different, right? And it's there's a completely different sort of level of I would say there's a very high stakes environment in the for profit, right? And it's driven a lot by like commercial demands and like what the consumer needs and what the market requires, and there are a lot of these external pressures which I think create challenging environments in for profits. Which it's kind of good to like get experience working under that pressure and like understanding what it takes to succeed there in a very sort of like, sometimes it can be a cutthroat environment, but I think that's a really helpful experience to have for a few years. Not saying that non-profit sector is like, it's not challenging at all. That's not the case at all. So I think that also has its own set of challenges, because oftentimes there's a heavy emotional toll in the work that you kind of do, because you're dealing with like really serious things. I think depending on the organization that you're working in, the levels of rigor will vary. Like in Teach for India, I would say it's quite a rigorous environment. That is, it's not that just because in non-profit the levels of rigor or competency is lower than it is in a for-profit. But I think all of those factors do come into account sometimes in the non-profit sector. So yeah, in short, I would say like those are some of the things to consider, which is just like, what is your long-term trajectory, and if it is like, if the non-profit sector is something that you are looking to explore briefly, then also would consider like having like some for-profit experience, because I would say like that really helps hone your skills and like give you different perspectives before you then jump into the non-profit sector. Other than that, specifically, obviously, like would keep reading up as much as possible about the sector. Lots of interesting things happening in the sector even now, especially with the pandemic, and how that's shifted like people's notions of what is important and where to give and how to give, and with technology that's playing a lot of a much higher and more enhanced role in a lot of nonprofits. So I think would just keep reading about all of that so that you stay informed about the sector as a whole as well. So even if you're planning to like zoom into a smaller subsection of the sector, which is like education or health or whatever, would just keep yourself even informed about the larger trends in the social sector overall. Yeah, I mean that's kind of like what I had in mind. But if you have any further questions about that, happy to like elaborate more.
No, that's perfectly helpful, and I think the key part which resonates with me at least is that get some experience if you're not 100% sure of being there, because
Yeah.
it does sound cool to be in the sector, but there are a lot of vagaries that people underestimate before getting there. So yeah. Yeah, so thank you so much for taking out time, Aditya. This was a really good conversation, and all the best with your new role. Although it's just 4 months old, but I'm sure you'll do really well. Thank you for taking out time.
Thank you so much, man. All the best to you as well, and to anyone else who might be watching this video.